The night before I shipped out, I wrote my mother a letter and buried it for 40 years. I didn't mail it. I didn't even tell her I'd written it. I folded it into a clean white envelope, tucked it behind the lining of my army footlocker, and snapped the lid shut like it had never happened. And I might have gone to my grave never thinking of it again, until the day I found it, not in a moment of nostalgia, not searching for closure. I was in the garage, sweating through an old Sunday afternoon, digging for paperwork I couldn't find. The footlocker sat where it always had, scuffed and silent, like a sealed chapter of a book I'd never finished reading. I opened it, and there it was, tucked beneath the edge of my Class A jacket, like it had been waiting. The envelope had yellowed with time, brittle at the folds. Her name, Eleanor, written in my hand. No address, no stamp, just the word I hadn't said enough when I had the chance. I had written that letter the night before we deployed, not during some quiet hour of reflection, but in the cafeteria, under a low humming bulb and the distant sound of boots on tile. A room full of noise and nerves, guys laughing too loud, or not at all, trying to joke through the knot in their throats, and me, sitting in a corner, my tray untouched, scribbling like I was running out of time. And maybe I was. I remember how I started it. Dear Mom, that's all I wrote for several minutes, just that. 2 words. I stared at them, chewing on the end of the pen, listening to the chaos around me. What I really wanted to write, what I couldn't bring myself to say, was that I was scared, that under the uniform, the shaved head, the whole hardened act, I was still just her boy, that the idea of going to a place I couldn't imagine, to do a thing I couldn't yet understand, felt like walking into a tunnel with no clear way out. But I didn't write any of that. I kept it light, vague. I'm thinking of you. Thanks for everything. Don't worry too much. Safe phrases, sentences that could be read in any order and still mean nothing. It wasn't what I wanted to say. It was what I could. And then, without ceremony, I folded the letter, slid it behind the lining of the locker, and closed the lid. I never mailed it, and I never thought of it again. Until that day, standing in the dust and silence of my garage, decades later, my mother's name on that envelope felt like a whisper from another life. We weren't a family that spoke openly about feelings. She wasn't distant, just contained. Everything she gave through action. She was the kind of woman who made your favorite breakfast when you failed a test, who packed an extra sandwich in your bag because you might not like the mess hall. She didn't say, "I love you" with words. She said it with folded laundry and hot soup. And I learned to speak that language too. So when I left for the Army, I didn't tell her I was afraid. I told her I'd be fine, and she didn't say she was proud of me. She handed me a Bible and a small envelope of cash, said, "Write when you can," and hugged me so tightly my ribs ached. That hug was the loudest she ever spoke. Opening that letter again brought all of it back. I hadn't lost it. I had hidden it. That was the twist I hadn't expected. This wasn't a forgotten scrap of paper. This was a secret I had deliberately buried. A truth I'd folded up and placed behind metal and dust, as if doing so would let me skip the part where I had to feel it. Why? I think part of me believed it was protection. I thought she didn't need to know how hard it was, that telling her would only make it worse, that silence was strength, and strength was duty. But that wasn't the whole truth. The deeper reason was simpler. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to tell her that everything she'd given me, every hard-earned bit of discipline, tenderness, resolve, it all lived in me. And I didn't want to fail that legacy. I didn't want her to think I was cracking before I'd even crossed the ocean. So I wrote a letter that said almost nothing. And then I buried it. That moment in the garage, holding that paper again, it felt like picking up a version of myself I had long since abandoned. That kid, barely out of high school, trying to be brave in a world that demanded silence over sincerity. And yet, there was so much in that silence. Even the act of writing, even if I never sent it, was a kind of reaching, a kind of hope, that she might somehow feel what I couldn't say. Now, all these years later, I sat down right there on the concrete floor. I didn't even brush off the dust. I just sat, letter in hand, heart pounding like I was 20 again. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at her name. 3 syllables that once filled a room. 3 syllables that still hold me in place. This letter, this fragile, almost forgotten thing, was about to speak louder than I ever had. And I wasn't ready. But I knew I would have to be, because some silences don't break on their own. You have to choose. And I had finally reached the age where I couldn't afford to keep choosing silence. Not with her. Not with anyone. Not anymore. The desert made a different kind of silence. It wasn't quiet. Not really. The wind dragged through the tents like a whisper that never stopped. Machinery clanked, voices echoed, distant engines rose and fell with no pattern. But under it all there was a weight, a kind of mental stillness, like everything personal got locked behind glass. You moved, you worked, you watched, you didn't feel unless you had to. Deployment stripped things away quickly. I stopped thinking about the letter almost immediately after I left. There was no time for reflection, and even less space for softness. We were trained for endurance, not expression. What you said was less important than what you showed. Be sharp. Follow orders. Watch your buddy's back. Don't talk too much. We learned how to sleep in boots, how to read signs in the dirt, how to laugh without sounding afraid. We weren't heroic. We were young and hiding it well. Sometimes I'd remember her face, my mother's eyes the last time she saw me, but I wouldn't let the thought sit long. I told myself that kind of remembering was dangerous. It softened you. It distracted. So I pushed it down, as we all did. And the letter? That folded page from a different life? I had buried it before I ever crossed the ocean. Now I buried myself in routine. I became a version of me I thought she'd be proud of, calm, competent, unshakable. But what I didn't realize then was that in trying to protect her from worry, I had also cut myself off from any honest tether back home. I didn't just silence myself, I disappeared. After a while, it didn't feel like a choice. We were lucky, mostly. Our deployment wasn't marked by constant firefights or major loss. But it had its moments, the kind you don't tell stories about at the dinner table. Moments that slip behind your ribs and stay there. Things you witness that no amount of time can smooth over. But what surprised me more than the fear was the numbness, how quickly it settled in, how normal it became to swallow everything, to keep your face neutral even when your heart was racing like a bird in a cage. And when the numbness takes root, it doesn't let go easily. even after the uniform comes off. When I came home, I didn't unpack much, not my duffel, not my memories, not the things I should have said years earlier. I got a job, built a life, married. We had one boy, Michael. Grew up in the house his mother and I fixed up ourselves. A quiet kid, bright eyes, always curious. He had her laugh and my mother's stubbornness. But I couldn't tell him much. He'd ask about the army, and I'd give the safe answers. It was different back then. Hard work, long days. I kept the tone light, the details thin. If he asked too much, I changed the subject. There was always something more pressing: homework, yard work, bills. The truth was never urgent, and so I told it to no one. Until one afternoon when Michael was about 11. I was out in the garage again, same space where I'd later find the letter. I had the hood of the truck open, cursing at a stuck bolt, grease on my hands and sweat soaking my shirt. He came in quiet, holding something I'd asked for but didn't really need. He stood there a second too long, and then he asked, "Dad, were you ever scared?" He didn't say of what. He didn't have to. I knew what he meant. Scared over there. Scared during. Scared of dying. Of not coming back. The question split me open, but I didn't let it show. I wiped my hands, gave him a crooked grin, said, "You know me, buddy. I don't scare easy." Then I turned back to the engine and told him to hand me the wrench. He did, and he nodded like he believed me. But I knew he didn't. That moment has haunted me more than anything I saw in uniform, because in that instant I had a chance, a clear, open door. My son was offering trust, vulnerability, a question not from curiosity, but from the ache of growing up, and I, his father, shut it, not because I meant to, but because silence had become my reflex. What I didn't realize then was how my silence taught him, not with lessons or lectures, but with absence, with what I failed to say. I had inherited that from my mother, the quiet strength, the dignity of restraint. But in passing it on, I never asked whether it served him the way it once served me. Looking back now, I see a pattern as clear as a family tree, a line of strong, silent people, all of us guarding something fragile that we didn't dare name. And that day in the garage, I passed the torch to my son without even knowing it. Years rolled on. He grew. I aged. The war faded into the kind of memory only old friends and old scars still carry. And I never told him. Never told him about the fear, about the letter, about the boy I once was, writing to a mother he couldn't bear to disappoint. That is, until the day I found it again, that fragile envelope from another world. Holding it brought everything back with such force it took my breath. But more than the past, it brought the present into focus. Because when I looked at that letter, I didn't just see my mother, I saw Michael. And I realized if I didn't break the silence now, it would grow roots in him too. He'd pass it on like a family heirloom, one more man who couldn't say what he felt, who couldn't open up without shame. That wasn't the legacy I wanted. So I made a choice. After 40 years, I decided to read the letter aloud, not just for my mother, but for my son, because the time for silence had finally run out. I waited 3 days before I opened the letter again. It sat on the kitchen counter, always within reach, always just out of reach. I moved around it like it was something alive. Every time I passed it, I felt a quiet weight pressing down, like the moment right before a confession when you're not sure if speaking the truth will set you free or just unmake everything. I tried to distract myself, cleaned the porch, organized the shed, sharpened my garden tools, but my eyes kept drifting back to that envelope, her name on the front still in my handwriting, faded now, but unmistakable. Somehow it looked older than I remembered, as if time had been etched into the fibers. On the fourth morning, just before sunrise, I sat down in the dining room. No distractions, no coffee, just the soft blue of morning light slipping in through the blinds and a letter resting between my hands. And I read it aloud, not in my head, not to the room, to her. I imagined her sitting across from me in her old robe, one hand around a chipped mug, the other folded neatly in her lap. That's how I remember her best, present, alert, never wasting words. "Dear Mom," I began. I didn't expect the emotion to rise so fast. My throat tightened by the second line. The words, simple as they were, held more weight than I'd realized. I had only written a few paragraphs all those years ago, but they carried every ounce of a young man's fear and longing. "I know I don't say this out loud, but I'm proud to be your son. I hope I come back. I'm scared, but I don't want you to worry." Those were my words, raw, unsophisticated, but honest, maybe the most honest thing I'd ever written. There was no flourish, no heroism, just a boy, barely 20, trying to write himself into courage by the light of a flickering bulb. By the time I finished reading, I wasn't crying. I was just still, like the air around me had shifted, like I had finally exhaled a breath I'd been holding for decades. For a long moment, I sat in silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. And then I folded the letter back into its envelope and went to find my son. Michael was in the backyard, sitting on the steps with a mug of coffee, watching the dog nose through a patch of clover. He looked up as I stepped outside, but didn't say anything. We've never been the kind of men who fill space just to fill it. But this time, I had something to say. "I want to read you something." He nodded, surprised but not resistant. I sat down beside him. The letter in my hand trembled slightly, whether from age or nerves, I couldn't tell. I read it again, slower this time, my voice steadier. As the words filled the quiet morning, I felt something open between us, something wide and unfamiliar. I didn't look at him while I read. I couldn't, but I could feel his presence beside me, listening without interruption. No phone, no watch checking, just stillness, attention. When I finished, I let the silence stretch. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. Eventually, I glanced at him. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he didn't try to hide it. "I never knew you felt all that," he said quietly. I nodded. I never knew how to say it. He looked at the letter, then back at me. "I'm glad you finally did." What he said next caught me off guard. "Can I come with you when you visit her?" The offer undid me. Not because I needed the company, but because he understood, without me having to explain, that this wasn't just about a letter. It was about closing a circle, about bringing something home. We agreed to go the next morning. The cemetery is only a half-hour's drive, but it felt longer that day. Neither of us spoke much during the ride. Just the hum of tires, a few birds flicking past the windshield. It wasn't the words that mattered anymore. It was the movement, the act of going. I hadn't visited her grave in some time. Life had crept in, but there it was, just as I remembered. The modest headstone under a sprawling oak tree, her name carved in granite, her dates flanked by ivy. Michael hung back as I stepped forward. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I pulled the letter from my jacket and placed it at the base of the stone. The wind picked up slightly, nudging the paper like a gentle breath. I let my hand rest on the granite, cool, textured, unmoving. There were no grand revelations in that moment, no visions, just presence, just the knowledge that something buried had finally been brought into the light. Behind me, I heard Michael's footsteps approach. He stood beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. We stood that way for a long time, 2 generations bridged not by shared stories, but by the courage it takes to finally speak them. I thought of her hands folding my shirts, of the night she made chili and cornbread the evening before I left, her way of saying, "Come back." I thought of her standing on the porch, watching the bus pull away. And I thought of the part of me that had carried her all these years, unspoken. And, for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt grateful. We walked back to the car in silence, but it was a different silence now. It didn't come from fear. It came from fullness. That letter, written by a frightened young man, hidden away, almost forgotten, had become more than words. It had become a doorway, and I had finally walked through it. What lay on the other side wasn't a revelation. It was relationship, not just with her, but with him, and with the parts of myself I had long kept locked behind armor. Some endings don't come with fanfare. They arrive quietly, like morning light creeping across the floorboards before you've even opened your eyes. That's how it felt in the weeks after we visited her grave. Nothing dramatic, no bolts of insight, just a shift, slow, certain, steady. I noticed it first in the space between conversations. Michael started calling more often, not out of obligation, but rhythm. We spoke plainly, not always deeply, but with an ease that hadn't been there before. The pauses weren't gaps anymore. They were room to breathe, and I, who had once kept everything tucked neatly behind silence, found myself speaking more freely, not in speeches, not in long-winded stories, just truthfully. If something mattered, I said so. If I was proud, I let him know. If I missed someone, I didn't pretend I didn't. That letter had taught me something I never expected. Silence, when worn too long, becomes a second skin. You think it's protecting you, but really, it's hiding you, and sometimes it hides you from the people you love the most. I had worn that silence for years, believed it was strength, believed it spared others pain, but all it really did was keep me alone in a room full of people who would have listened if I'd just let them. Michael never said it outright, but I could tell that hearing the letter changed something for him too. Not just how he saw me, but how he saw himself. I caught him once, months later, helping his daughter write a card to her grandmother. He didn't rush her. He didn't censor her. He just listened, encouraged, and when she was done, he smiled and said, "That's exactly what she needs to hear." It was the kind of small thing most folks wouldn't notice, but I did, because that's the kind of moment silence never allows. And I knew then, in a quiet, certain way, that the old patterns were finally breaking. The letter itself, well, I didn't keep it. I left it on her grave that day for a reason, not out of ceremony, not for closure, but because I needed it to belong to the past again. What I did keep was the envelope. Just that. It had softened with age, the paper now delicate as a dried leaf. Along one edge, the dew from that morning at the cemetery had left a faint mark, like the outline of a tear that never fully dried. I placed it in a small frame and hung it in the hallway. Not in a place of honor, not as a symbol, just there. A simple reminder that the words we carry matter, even the ones we never speak, especially those. Sometimes I glance at it when I pass by, not often, but enough, and every time I do, I hear her voice. Not how she sounded exactly, but how she felt. Strong, still, steady. I never did hear her say she was proud of me, but I feel it now, because I finally became the kind of man who could say it back. There's something sacred about things that go unsaid for too long. They gather weight, they grow roots, and when you finally let them speak, they don't shout. They whisper, and those whispers stay with you. For me, it was a letter. For you, it might be something else. A phone call never made. A hug never given. A truth held behind your teeth for so long, it started to taste like silence itself. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do, but I can tell you this. It's never too late. Never too late to pick up the phone, to write the letter, to say what matters, especially when it's hard. Because every day we stay silent, we miss a chance to be known. And being known, truly seen, truly heard, is what holds us together when everything else begins to fade. I've lived long enough now to know that the biggest regrets aren't things we did. They're the words we never said, the people we left wondering, the feelings we buried because we thought they'd be too much. What I've learned, what my mother tried to show me in her own quiet way, is that love is never too much. It can feel heavy sometimes, sure, but it's a weight we're meant to carry. And when we do, when we carry it openly, it doesn't crush us, it steadies us, and it connects us across time, across loss, across silence. I've lived long enough to know the biggest regrets aren't things we did. They're the things we left unsaid, the people we left wondering, the words we carried too long. That letter I never mailed. It still found its way home. So I'll ask you this. Is there someone you haven't written to yet? Is there something still folded in your heart? Maybe today's the day. Not for closure, not for performance, just for truth. Because the words matter. They always have. This morning, I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee. The steam curled up into the cool air, soft and slow. A sparrow landed on the railing again. Same as yesterday. It didn't stay long, but it saw me. Sometimes that's all we really need. To be seen, to be heard, to speak. If this story spoke to you, I hope you'll share your own. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Come back. We've all got letters we haven't mailed. Not anymore.